Daniel Gillman here with College.town, joined now by the sixth president of the NCAA, Charlie Baker, here at the 2026 NCAA convention in DC. And start off by asking maybe what's one protection that didn't exist maybe 5 years ago that you guys have fought to help athletes with?
Well, I can think of a few of those.
Perfect.
Obviously the post-eligibility health insurance program, which gives every kid across all three divisions access to a health insurance program sponsored by the NCAA if they get injured playing their sport at school and they leave school and they're still in treatment. And that thing has
Perfect.
been collecting and paying claims now for almost 2 years. The core guarantees around scholarships in Division One. The way that works is if you get a scholarship, you keep it, whether you choose to play or not. So for a lot of kids, that's really important. And you can keep it for up to 10 years. And obviously, we're still sort of in year 3 or 4, so that's a little less relevant so far. But the bottom line was to make sure the scholarship was there for kids who didn't complete their degree during their 4 years on campus, and they would still have that scholarship available to them afterwards.
Well, President Baker, I want to dive in about your conversation yesterday with your media availability towards kind of gearing away from that state-by-state basis for either the 5th year of eligibility or the added years of redshirting. Where do you feel like between these two is more realistic for a push from either the coaches of the FBS or wanting the colleges to move towards extra eligibility?
Well, I appreciate the coaches sort of weighing in with their point of view on this, and I know that a lot of them are dealing with some of the very significant issues that come with settling the 3 court cases that are commonly referred to as the House injunction. But we have a D1 cabinet, and that D1 cabinet has representatives from across Division One, and they are, for all intents and purposes, the practitioners that we rely on. A lot of athletic directors, a lot of commissioners, a lot of coaches, a few presidents, and that's the body that we rely on to talk about things like eligibility. That said, while we've dealt with a significant number of cases around eligibility in court in the last year or so, at a preliminary injunction level, we've won, somewhere between 65 and 70% of those. So the courts, for the most part, have bought in that is a pro-competitive policy, and it's one that they support.
Sticking with eligibility, your conversation last week or last month with the NBA Commissioner Adam Silver about the draft and stash idea. Walk me through how that can relate.
I have no idea what draft and stash is, and I can promise you that those 3 words never came up in my conversation with Adam Silver. So I
that's good.
was shocked by
the reports.
By the reports that came out. I went to see him about sports betting, and that's what we spent most of our time talking about, was prop bets and prediction markets. We had a really brief conversation about the memo that we put out, which was basically just a clarification of our existing rules around pre-enrollment eligibility. And Adam basically said, yeah, I'm pretty familiar with that. So what is draft and stash? I don't even know.
I guess when you look at from the hockey side of things, a team can draft a player and then they go back and play at the college level. And so when it comes around the James Nnaji situation.
Never signed a contract, never played a game.
So moving forward.
Never signed a contract, never played a game. The fact that he was drafted seemed to be the thing everybody landed on. But if you look at our bylaws, they pretty consistently say, if you sign an NBA contract, you're not eligible on a pre-enrollment basis. But he didn't do that. And one of your colleagues in the sports media space wrote a pretty interesting piece on this whole issue. And he basically said, and I think he nailed it, he said the NCAA hasn't changed its rules. What's changed are the incentives. And that, I think, is sort of the point that no one had made up until that point in time.
I do think that a lot of the confusion may come around the fact that he was a part of a big trade, right, for Karl Anthony Towns. And so that kind of puts him into a piece where how do you distinguish the amateurism versus a professional labor market when a player has that?
He never sat on a bench. He never played in a game. He never signed a contract. I mean, I get the fact that on
Yeah.
paper he was part of something, but in terms of his actual eligibility, he's completely consistent with the rules that have been there for a long time. And the other thing I heard a lot about was, this sudden issue with respect to kids enrolling in January and being immediately eligible. That's been true in basketball for as long as I can remember, and kids have been doing it forever. So, yeah, he's definitely stirred up the pot. But in some respects, it was. I do think it was a change in incentives more than anything that had to do with the change in the way we work. And I think a lot of people, I think there was some real mythology out there about him, and it might have been because he was drafted, but never played, never signed a contract.
Well, I appreciate you kind of taking this on head on. I'm curious when it comes to the calendar of it all. Could we see players now transferring from one school to the other in January and
No,
then completely playing?
no. Remember, by the way, the transfer rule that a number of people have said they wish we had and it adopted, we did. That was our transfer rule, the one people have talked about, many of the coaches. We lost it in a court case in West Virginia a couple of years ago that actually involved a basketball player who was transferring for the third time in 3 years. And in that particular case, the attorney general in West Virginia brought the case. He was joined by several other attorneys general, and the judge who issued the decision basically said kids should be able to transfer once a year as long as they're academically eligible, no matter what. And that's been our rule since then, because that was the decision that was made by the judge. I know it doesn't make a lot of coaches particularly excited about the way it works, and that it creates confusion and challenges for them. And I am super sympathetic to that, because that's not what my preferred policy would be. I thought the policy we had before was the right one. But, at the end of the day, you got to follow what the court says.
Last question on this matter specifically. I want to get a bit of clarification. So, will we see players that are in the G League or playing pro in Europe then have the right to come and be eligible at the college level?
Well, if you're a two-way player in the G League, the answer is no, because then you sign an NBA contract. But if you're just a G League player who's never played college sports, it's theoretically, well, yeah, you will see some of that. But when they come in, they will lose the seasons of competition that were associated with their time in the G League. So if you graduate from high school or if you come out of high school and decide to play in the G League for a year or two, and that's all you do, you'll lose your seasons of competition there, but you're still going to be on a pre-enrollment basis eligible to play college basketball if you can meet the academic requirements associated with being a college student.
And then would that NBA team have the right when
No.
they leave college? It
No.
would just be a redraft for James
Right.
Nnaji. Okay. And then moving forward, do you see other sports that this specific qualification can apply to?
We've had kids. The pre-enrollment thing is completely different than somebody who's looking for a reinstatement. Let's be clear about that. Somebody who's never been to college is a lot different than somebody who's been to college, gone to college, and then leaves and gets drafted. Okay, yeah. That's a very different person, and from our rules point of view, very different as well. I think I wouldn't be surprised if it comes up at some point in some other sports again, primarily because of the issue that's related to the change in the incentives. I thought the writer who wrote about that kind of nailed it. If there's an opportunity to participate in an NIL program or a Redshirt program, I think you could see it happen in some other sports.
Appreciate that. That was candid and well said. Now I want to pivot a little bit and talk about the initiative that you helped lead with Team Impact and kind of how that has grown since the infancy of it, and even into the Indiana championship coming up next week, and to see what growth that is.
Did you see the social media post that the IU football team put up?
It did.
It was beautiful.
It was heartwarming.
The Team Impact was actually started by some people in Massachusetts that I know, and my wife and I have been both personally, financially donating to it for many years, and I have always found Team Impact to be just a truly remarkable win-win, because what you're basically doing is you're taking some young person who's got many cases of debilitating and in many cases a life-threatening disease or illness or malady, and you make it possible for them to be drafted by a college sports team. And and they do become a full member of that team. And for that young person, it is like a gift like no other. And they develop this whole new community of friends and supporters. And the thing people don't talk about is how much this changes the way the student athlete thinks about themselves and their own circumstances. I remember visiting Augustana, which is in South Dakota, and they had a team impact kid who had a really debilitating muscular disease with his legs. And I asked one of the guys on the team, I said, "What's it like to have Jack around?" And he said, "We love him. He's a great kid." And he paused for a minute, and then he said, "I used to hate running lines, the back and forth, baseline, foul line,
Yep.
baseline, midcourt, baseline, far foul line, baseline, all the way down and back." He said, "I used to hate that." He said, "Now I'm grateful that I'm able and allowed to do that, because when I look and see what Jack's going through, I really am the luckiest guy in the building." And I think there's no question the impact, the positive impact on the young person who becomes part of this team is profound. I've talked to tons of parents about this. I've talked to a lot of the kids themselves. But the other thing people need to understand is the impact this has on the kids who are playing in the program, when they see what these people have to go through just to get through the day. The sense of gratitude and humility about their own situation and the stuff they bellyache about in the course of a given day is really profound.
You speak with such enthusiasm about this. Is there anything else in the last 6 months or year that you have helped spearhead or seen in terms of growth from a human perspective in the NCAA levels?
Well, I spend a lot of time with almost every time I go to a championship or I go to a campus, I talk to the kids who are playing sports there. And I get a very wide variety of points of view and life experiences about all kinds of things. The one thing I would say is I these kids in some cases don't even appreciate what it is they're learning playing a sport. I mean, every once in a while somebody will say, "I got a job interview next week. Like, what should I say and how should I relate sports to that?" And I look at them and I say, "Do you think playing a sport helped you manage your calendar?" "Well, yeah." "Were you able to put aside your own interests in behalf of something greater than that, like for the team?" "Well, of course." Um, "Can you take constructive criticism and give constructive criticism in a positive and effective way?" "Well, yeah, that you can't get any better if you don't do that." "Do you believe in the grind?" "Of course." I mean, and I literally, and eventually they get kind of annoyed at me because these seem like pretty obvious questions. And I finally just look at them and say, "Look, just say those things when you go to your job interview, because those are the kinds of things people are looking for when they hire somebody." And for a lot of kids, I think this is something they absolutely equate with their sports and athletic experience. But I think for some of them, it hasn't quite translated yet into how valuable that's going to be in sort of everything else they do.
Speaking of value, I think something that constantly gets swept under the rug with NIL and seeing the outrageous numbers that some quarterbacks are getting is the equity that now is being spread across to some of the other sports as well in terms of the house settlement. Where do you feel? I remember you posted, you said something about a 50-page FAQ that was going to come out right after. Where do you feel some of those main questions have kind of laid that people are confused still about when it comes to the house settlement and the way that maybe not the superstars, but some of the players that still deserve a little bit of money are getting paid out?
Well, I'm trying to remember now what the number was, but I think the NIL Go system has processed, I think, which is the College Sports Commission, which oversees all the third-party NIL stuff, separate from the school-based stuff. I think they said they've done 17,000, they've approved 17,000 deals, 11,000 different people. And I think the average value of the average deal was like $7,500. So that's a pretty clear indicator. Now, I'm sure within that, there's a lot of range, right? But the bottom line is if the average is $7,500, that means you got a ton of kids who are accessing third-party NIL through that program, who are not the $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $4 million kids. And I think a big piece of that actually is probably coming from the school-based revenue share. And I've said all along that for me, the most important part about getting the schools involved, because when I took this job, everybody could talk to college students about revenue except the schools, which always struck me as nuts, because in the end, everybody, the agents, the collectives, everybody else's interest was to get you away from the school you're at and get you to some other school so they could either get paid or get you on their team. And the school you were at was not allowed to talk to you. Crazy. So I started talking about a school-based NIL program like 6 months after I got the job. And I'm really glad that it was part of what ultimately came out in the House agreement. And I do think that one of the reasons we actually saw a very significant drop in the number of FBS and FCS players, football players who went into the portal in January relative to last year, it's down like 20%, was because schools finally had a chance to actually talk to kids directly. And I think a bunch of kids are probably staying where they were because their school was in a position to talk to them about why staying was a good thing for them and a good thing for the school. So, look, a lot of the mess, I mean, anybody who thinks the third biggest thing that's happened in the last 125 years of college sports, 6 months after it got implemented, was all going to be perfect. I mean, that's kind of unrealistic. I think the real issue is when you have something that comes up that's confusing or challenging, use it as a chance to create clarity and make adjustments. And I think the system currently is going to be challenging because it is so new and so different. But I also think we have a great opportunity within that to take advantage of opportunities to create clarity. And I mean, the College Sports Commission's constantly putting out interpretive guidelines about all sorts of things. We work very closely with them to make sure that we have rules that are consistent with their guidelines, because their guidelines only apply to the people who are actually using their system, but the rules got to apply to everybody in D1. And I think it's way too early to, sort of ring the bell because it's all working, or throw up your hands because it's not, because it's a really big deal. It's very complicated, and it just happened.
Take us a little bit deeper into your communication with either Bryan Seeley, the CEO of the Collegiate Sports or College Sports Commission, or just overall as a communication base between. What are the conversations like?
We talk to those guys every week. Our Division I governance folks talk to them every week. I talk to Bryan about once a month. He talks to the D1 commissioners on a pretty regular basis. I'm glad he's got a chief investigator. I'm glad he's got a chief operating officer now. And, no one wants him to succeed more than I do, because his success is a big part of the success of the House injunction. And I'm very glad that the schools are back into having a conversation about trying to get that participant agreement done, because I do think that would help.
I want to go back. You gave a bit of a teaser when you talked to the NBA Commissioner, Adam Silver, a bit about prop betting and gambling.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the argument is to try to eliminate betting on unders, because that gets rid of the
Yes.
corruption and the gang connection,
Yes.
mafia, all the crazy stories that have come out. What steps need to be taken to be able to just straight up eliminate betting unders and props?
Well, in a perfect world, the platforms themselves would do it. And they would do it because they are, in fact, where the most significant opportunities for people to game the system come from. I mean, if you look at almost all the issues that we've uncovered, and we run the largest integrity program around betting generally in the world, they're all about unders. And it's not just the mob, right? I mean, you have lots of kids, and you talk to kids on campus, they'll tell you, they got classmates, old friends, pseudo family members coming up to them and saying, I don't want you to lose the game. I just don't want you to make your first shot, catch the pass, whatever it might be. And I think part of the reason this is a tough nut for the sports books is because it's part of the parlays where they make most of their money. And honestly, that's not my problem. And if you think about how big a deal this is in the grand scheme of, when people were talking about legalizing sports betting, I mean, I was governor of Massachusetts then. There were a lot of restaurants and VFW halls and places like that were saying, well, will we be able to get a license so that people can bet at our facility if they come in to have a beer or whatever? Because everybody was still thinking this was going to be like little casinos everywhere else in the country. And of course, what it became was a system that's driven completely by your phone, and you can do it sitting in front of the TV anywhere, anytime, by yourself. And I think the challenges associated with this are far more significant than people realize. And I think the prop bet stuff in particular just leads. When we made a deal with Venmo to be able to get people who are, just being incredibly abusive to our student athletes because somebody didn't deliver on a prop in whatever way they were supposed to. And the person who lost the money is now demanding through Venmo that some
Crazy.
student athlete who they don't know and have never heard of, they want them to pay them. It's crazy.
Last thing here, and I want to tie it into the potential expansion of March Madness, but on top of that, these little advertisements for sports betting. Every sports talk show seemingly is sponsored by a different sports betting site. How do you keep that away from the NCAA as we continue to promote, the basketball tournament and make it bigger?
Well, we can't. There are limits to what we can do about what the people who talk about the tournament do. But there's plenty we can do with our partners at CBS and WBD to make sure that sports betting is not a part of the advertising or the actual in-game activity that takes place in the tournament, and it won't be.
Any timeline to an expansion for the basketball?
If we're going to do it by next year, and I think we would like to, the oversight committee still has some work to do, okay? I mean, and one of the big things we all have to figure out is the travel, because if we expand the tournament, the travel gets even more interesting. I think we need to get it done sometime this spring. It'll take a year to set it up.
President Baker, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to see you, Dan.
Absolutely.
Take care.